Hilchos, Tumas, Tzaraas, Perek Shvi, the laws of impurity imparted by Tzaraas, chapter 7. Today we have one of the more interesting subjects in the laws of Tzaraas, that's called Kulei Hafach Lavan, the person who turns completely white. Until now we're dealing with small lesions, small spots, if they're pure, if they're impure. What happens if a person had a lesion and then that lesion spreads to cover his entire skin? He's fully white. Now what do we do? So here we have a very counterintuitive halacha. The Rambam will say it in halacha aleph, but it's going to really be the guiding principle throughout the whole chapter. And that is, you have to know what was the person's state before the lesion spread. If he was impure before the lesion spread, or at least doubtfully impure, then when it spreads, the spreading makes him pure. But if he was in a state of purity before the lesion spread, then if it spreads, it makes him impure. It's a very interesting concept. So let's see how the Rambam defines it in the first halacha, and then we'll get all the details on this throughout the chapter. Halacha aleph, misha hoysa be'baheres. Let us say that a person had a lesion. V'huchlat be'echad misimani tuma. And then it was decided that he's impure because one of the signs of impurity appeared on the lesion. Here we have the michya, healthy patch of skin. But the same thing is if it spread or if it got white hairs. Point is, he's now declared impure. Bein betchila, bein achar hesger, doesn't matter when he was declared impure, whether it was the initial inspection or after a week of quarantine. At this point, he's impure because of a sign of impurity. Oy shehusgar, or he wasn't definitely impure, he's just doubtfully impure. He came to the Kohen saw it was questionable, he put him in quarantine for a week. During this quarantine, the Tzaraas spreads to the entirety of the body and he changes to white. Doesn't matter when the change happened, whether he was in a full state of impurity or only in quarantine, in a questionable state of impurity. But because the spreading happened once the person entered the realm of impurity, now the turning into white makes him pure. Avolim husgar. But if he was put into quarantine with a small lesion, and there was no sign of impurity for 2 weeks, and therefore he was sent home, he was exempted, he was declared pure. And after being exempted, in other words, right now he's with a lesion, but the lesion is in a state of purity, because 2 weeks went by and nothing happened. And then parcha tzaraas bekulei. Then the tzaraas spreads from there to the entire body. Harezeh tamei muchlat. Now he's completely impure. So because he was in a state of purity when the lesion spread, that's why he's impure. If he was in a state of impurity and the lesion spread, he becomes pure. There's an argument as to what the reasoning for this concept is. Rashi on the Torah gives his reason, but according to the Rambam, it's a gzeira sakasuv. This is a law, that's a divine decree that actually doesn't have a logical reason. Nevertheless, as the Rebbe once said, that the illogical part is more the turning of impure into pure. The reason why, if a person were pure and then it spread, he becomes impure, is somewhat reasonable to understand, because at the end of the day, the lesion is tzaraas. Even though he was exempted for it, it was only because you couldn't hold him for more than 2 weeks. But technically, the lesion is still begeder, it's in the definition of tzaraas. So therefore, when it spreads, it's like any nega that spreads, and you become impure. The hard part, understands, when it's impure, spreading makes you pure, that's the gzeira sakasuf. Halacha beis, haba b'tchila. Let us say somebody comes to the Kohen for the initial inspection. V'hu kulei hafach lavan. When he first shows up, he's totally white. So it's not spreading from any prior state. There was no state of a lesion with purity or a state of a lesion with impurity. He simply showed up white. Im hoysa by michya ishtei sayres levanes, says the Rambam, we have to examine the whole body now. The whole body becomes a lesion. If there is a healthy patch of skin somewhere, or 2 white hairs somewhere, we consider it to be a big lesion. A big lesion with a sign of impurity goes to become impure. Im ein sham simin tuma. If there's no sign of impurity, there's no healthy patch of skin, there's no white hairs, we treat it again like a regular small lesion. Put him into quarantine for a week. If after a week he gets white hairs or a healthy patch of skin, decidedly impure. Nothing, put him for a second week. If after a second week no sign of impurity still shows up, he is pure. When a person shows up initially with a fully white body, it's just called a baheres gedola. It's just a big lesion. And a big lesion is treated the same as a small lesion. Let us assume that the person showed up fully white. A white hair was discovered, 2 white hairs were discovered, and the Kohen therefore makes him impure. And then the sign of impurity went away because the white hairs transformed to black, or at least one of them did. so you don't have two white hairs. Or both of them became shortened. They're too short to be cut with a scissor. They're no longer called a hair. Maybe some shchin, an area with a burn, became juxtaposed to one of the two hairs, or to both of them. And therefore this shchin is covering part of the baheres, covering part of the lesion. Or a burn is surrounding, not adjacent, but it's fully around the two white hairs or one of the white hairs. Or something went through the two hairs to divide them. A burn, a healing area of a burn that's not from a fiery substance, a regular pigmentation, not something in the shade of Tzaraas. In all these cases, even though he was declared impure by a sign of impurity, since that sign went away or was destroyed, he's completely pure. If after that some more white hair shows up, or some more healthy skin shows up, now he's back to being impure, because he showed up first being fully white. What's the Rambam saying? The Rambam is saying, seemingly we just said that if white hair comes after the person has tzaraas spread to his whole body, it's no longer a sign of impurity. You become pure. But that's only when the spreading made you pure. You were impure, it spread to everything, so you became pure. Now, even if a white hair shows up, then it doesn't help anything. But over here, because the case began with you showing up as a fully white person, the spreading of the tzaraas never was a cause for your purity. It was simply like a regular big lesion. So the moment white hair will show up in this big lesion, it will be treated like a small lesion where white hair shows up. And now that you have white hairs, sign of impurity in the lesion, you're going to become impure. Echad, now that Rambam defines the concept of spreading to the whole body. Echad sheparcha tzaraas bekule ka'achas. It doesn't matter whether the tzaraas spread or grew on your entire body at once. The echad shepasasa uparcha ma'at ma'at ad shehil bin kule. Or it doesn't matter whether it spread slowly. It grew slowly, little by little, till the entirety of the person became whitened. If the spreading happened from a state of quarantine or a state of being decidedly impure, he now becomes pure. And if it's after the exemption was declared, he was in a state of purity, now it makes him impure. And if it's the way he initially showed up, go to quarantine. And the Rambam defines a further definition of the whiteness. It doesn't matter whether the entirety of the body was covered in one shade of white, or there was 8 different shades, 4 of the shades of white, and the 4 of the shades of white with red tinges, as we saw in chapter 1. Those are also considered to be tzaraas shades. Hakol mitzdarfin. As long as the entire body is covered in qualifying shades of white, it all combines, bein l'taharei, bein l'tamei, kamesh arnu, whether it means you're going to make him pure or impure, as we explained with the rules, depending on what state he was in previously. The point is, the whiteness doesn't have to be a uniform whiteness, has to just be what's called qualifying tzaraas whiteness. Halacha Gimel, we're going to discuss some more cases about lesions that spread to the entire body from a state of impurity, which means that they became pure because of the spreading. And through these cases, the Rambam is going to communicate to us a very important rule. The rule of how one would revert back to impurity. You have a person who was impure, the lesion spread to his entire body. What happens to get it back to being in a state of impurity? That's going to be the ultimate point of this halacha, which will lead to the next halacha and the rest of the chapter. Says the Rambam, Hoysabei baheres kigris. We begin with a case where a person had a lesion, minimum size of a gris, 6 by 6 hairs. Uba michya ka'adasha. And there was a sign of impurity in the lesion. Healthy patch of skin, size of a lentil, 2 by 2 hairs. Therefore, v'huchlat b'michya, the Kohen declared him decidedly impure because of the healthy patch of skin. So now he's in a state of impurity. Uparcha tzaraas bekulai, and then from this state of impurity, the tzaraas spread to the entire body. V'achar kach holcha michya, also afterwards the healthy patch of skin left as well. So now you have an entirely white. In this picture we have the hand, but it's really the whole body. The whole body turned white. Or it could have happened the other way around. Shaholcha hamichya tchila. Maybe the sign of impurity went away first, but as long as a Kohen didn't have a chance to see it or didn't have a chance to declare that it's pure, the person is still in the state of impurity, and therefore va'achar kach parcha bekulai, if afterwards the tzaraas spreads to the entire body, that's also considered to have spread from a state of impurity. Harei zatar, the person becomes pure. Even if afterwards the white hairs show up. Unlike in halacha beis, when a person shows up initially with a fully white body, 2 hairs can become a sign of impurity. Over here, white hairs showing up after it's spread from a state of impurity have no consequence. Nolda b'michya, however, if after spreading to the entire body from a state of impurity, a new healthy patch of skin shows up, even in a different place, tamei, the person now becomes impure. Shenemar, because the verse, right after it tells the special law of changing fully white, what does it say? Uviyayim heirais by basar chai yitma. On the day that healthy flesh shows up, the person becomes impure. Healthy flesh, a tiny bit of healthy flesh, we'll soon see the amount, showing up in a fully white body is impure. V'hu shetiyeh ka'adasha merubah sayeser, provided it's the size of a regular healthy patch of skin, which is a sign of impurity, the square lentil or more, 2 by 2 hairs. Haisa by baheres ubaseir lavan. What about this case? A person has a lesion, became impure because of 2 white hairs in the lesion. V'huchlat b'seir lavan, therefore he was declared decidedly impure. V'achar kach parcha b'kulei, and then it spreads to the entire body, again, spreading from a state of impurity. Afal pisha seir lavan b'mkoyim ha'omed, even though the white hair is still in place, and again, like I said before, in halacha beis, showing up with a white body, white hairs would be a problem. Over here, white hairs that are remaining from a prior state of impurity, and now it's spread, tahir, the person is pure. Shenemar, because the same verse implies this rule. It says, Uviyayim heirais by basar chai yitma. What is the only thing that causes somebody to revert back to being impure? Healthy flesh showing up. B'michya mistame, zeh shenepach kulei lavan, achar hechlete achar hesker. Only with healthy patch of skin does a person who had his skin change, or totally changed to white from a state of impurity, become back to being impure. Not a white hair. A white hair is only a sign of impurity on a fully white body if that's how he showed up to begin with. Not if it's a reversion back from after having spread from a state of impurity. What if originally the person had a lesion? He went to quarantine for a week, came back and it spread. The Kohen puts him away, decidedly impure because of the spreading. And then it spreads to the entire body. Tahir, again, this is spreading from a state of impurity, so you're pure. If after that healthy patch of skin shows up, tameh, you're impure. What's the bottom line of this halacha? No matter how your whole body became white, as long as it was from a state of impurity, you're pure. But then the way back to becoming impure is by healthy patch of skin. Halacha dalet. Now that we know that this healthy patch of skin reappearing could be a problem, we have to also wonder where is it a problem. Because if you remember in chapter 3 that Rambam told us that when it comes to regular lesions that appear on the tips of those limbs that have tips, the fingers, the toes, the nose, though over there, michya has no consequence. Healthy patch of skin is not a sign of impurity on the tips of the limbs. But it is consequential in this case. Halacha dalid af rashei ivarim. She'einon mitamin mishum michya shebeseicha baheres. Even those tips of the limbs that don't communicate impurity on account of healthy skin, if they're in a regular lesion, they do transmit impurity. They are essential to a person who has turned fully white. Ketzad, what does this mean? A person who was declared impure or is in quarantine and then becomes fully white with tzaraas, with the exception of a tiny bit, a lentil size of healthy skin. Even if that healthy skin is at the tip of his finger or the tip of his nose, he stays impure. This is not called fully turning white. Even though the same patch of healthy skin was not consequential in a regular lesion. Here it is. So too if a person became indeed fully white. He was impure, became fully white, so he became pure. If a lentil size of healthy skin reappeared, even if it reappeared at the tips of one of the limbs, he is decidedly impure. However, says the Rambam, what if we consider a small variation in the case? A person is impure, and then the entirety of his body turns white, with the exception of a lentil-sized area, even in the tips of one of the limbs, but it didn't stay healthy, that small part. It changed to another form of pigmentation, not a qualifying shade of whiteness. So really his entire body underwent the change, but it didn't all undergo a change to qualifying whiteness. Says the Rambam, this is still a person who is totally impure. That's not a person who had his whole body turn white. Shenemar, because the verse which describes this condition, What does it say? V'hinei kisasa haTzaras. The Kohen needs to see that the Tzaraas covered his entire body. Lo habayak, not pigmentation. It goes even further. Afilu haisa miktsas ha'adasha basar chai umiktsasa bayhak. Person was impure, his entire body becomes white, with the exception of a small patch of skin that's half healthy and half pigmentation. Harezu siman tuma. That's still a sign of impurity. That's healthy skin. That's not Tzaraas skin, which is a very big novelty in this case if you think about it. Because how much healthy skin is there? Less than a lentil-sized portion of healthy skin. If that was it that was there, person turns fully white, and all that's left is healthy skin at the size of less of a lentil bean, he'll be pure. That's called qualifying, turning fully white. But because there was less than a lentil size of healthy skin, less than a lentil size of pigmentation, those two come together to make the person impure. The Ravid argues on this, but the Rambam holds no. Pachis mikadasha of healthy skin, together with bayhak, ruins the spreading of the whiteness. But, says the Rambam, this is only true if it was on the way to becoming white. Person was impure, and the whiteness is spreading, and it didn't spread to the entire body. That's when pigmentation is still a sign of impurity. But if the person already became fully white, and then part of it changes to pigmentation, that's fine. A person has impurity. It spreads to his entire body, therefore he becomes pure. And then some of the flesh turns back into a pigmentation shade, not a qualifying Tzaraas shade. Here he's pure. Until you get a full lentil-sized bean, size of healthy flesh. Because it says, once the person becomes pure, the only thing to bring him back to impurity is actual healthy flesh. Not pigmentation. Same thing if partially it came back. Partially healthy skin, partially pigmentation. But there was not a full lentil size of either one. It's not a sign of impurity, he stays pure. Halacha hey, says the Rambam, kol tamisha parchat Tzaraas bekuloi. Any person who is impure, and the Tzaraas spreads to his entire body, toher, he's pure as we said. Nizgala mimenu kadasha basar chai. If a lentil-sized area becomes revealed, nitma, he becomes impure, as we said. Now comes the novelty, chazar v'niskasa b'Tzaraas. If it becomes covered again with Tzaraas, toher, he's back to being pure. Chazar v'nizgala, if it opens up again, nitma, he's back to being impure. Afilu meya pa'amim, even 100 times. Hischil habasar hachayli hizgalis. If the healthy skin began to open, and it's keeping on to spread, while the Tzaraas is keeping on to recede, he's back to being impure, until of course the lesion itself becomes smaller than 6 by 6 hairs, by which point he'll actually be pure. But once it begins to recede and healthy skin shows up, you become impure until otherwise fully pure. Any part of the skin that could potentially become susceptible to Tzaraas, regular white spots, is essential, will hold back somebody who's turning fully white. Any part of the skin that could turn white and would be qualifying for Tzaraas needs to turn white. But those parts of the skin, which we saw yesterday, which aren't fitting to have white spots on them, if they don't turn white, that's fine, not essential. Ketzad, what does that mean? A person has Tzaraas, small lesion, impure, then it spreads to the entire body, besides for the head and the beard. Or it doesn't spread to an area of a burn that was in a fresh wound, which Tzaraas can't affect. Or less than a lentil size, healthy skin remains next to and around these burns that are fresh, or the head or the beard. You're always pure, because these areas could not become affected with Tzaraas even had there been a regular lesion there. So they don't have to become white in this case. But if the head and the beard became bald in an unnatural way, which now they are susceptible to white spots, as we saw in chapter 5. Or if the area of the fresh burn wounds became scabbed, and now they're like a shchin and a mikvah, and they're able to have white spots in there. Now, white needs to affect them. Your person is impure until the Tzaraas will spread also to there. Because right now, they are fitting to become susceptible to a white spot. Or a person has 2 white spots of Tzaraas on his body. One has a sign of impurity, let's call it white hairs, and one is pure. Uparcha ha'tehoira latmeya, va'achar kach parcha bekulei. Pay attention. The spreading began from the pure lesion, spread to the impure lesion, and then spread to the entire body. So it went from the pure part to the impure part, and from there to the entire body. Harei tahor. The person is pure. This is called spreading from a state of impurity. Because he was already decidedly impure. Even though it was the pure one that began the spreading, that's not called spreading from a state of purity. And the reasoning is because in this case we follow the person, not the lesion. Not only that, even if the two spots were not on two spots on the hand, they were on the two lips. One on the upper lip, one on the lower lip, or on two fingers or on two eyelids. When you put the fingers together, or the lips together, or the eyelids together, they both seem like one spot. If from there it spreads to the entirety of the person, tahor, he is pure. He's considered to have spread from a state of impurity, not from a state of purity. Halacha Zayin, in conclusion of the chapter. Knowing as we do the laws of kulei hafach lavan, that if it changes to the whole body from impurity, you're pure. If it spreads from purity, you're impure. So the Rambam makes the following interesting observation. Yesh mare niger lakoyin v'niskar. You could have a person who shows his lesion to a kohen, and he gains because he came early to show it and he didn't wait. Sometimes coming early helps you. V'yesh mare umafsid. There's another case where coming early will work against you. It will make you lose out. Ketzad, what does this mean? The Rambam first defines the second case. Misha haya muchlat v'holchu lahen simani tuma. Let's say a person was muchlat. He had a lesion with impurity, and therefore he was made impure. V'holchu lahen simani tuma, then the signs of impurity disappeared. So now, if he would rush to the Kohen, he'd become pure right now. But he didn't have a chance to show it to the Kohen by the time it spread to his entire body. So the last thing the Kohen knows about him is that he's impure. Now that it spread to his entire body, when the Kohen inspects it, tahor, he'll be pure, because he spread from a state of impurity. Had he rushed and showed it to the Kohen, and he would have exempted him before the Tzaraas spread to the entire body. And then he would have spread after the exemption. He would be completely impure, as we explained, because he'd be considered spreading from a state of purity. So in this case, showing it early would make him lose, and the fact that he waited made him win. But what if there was a lesion with nothing inside of it? And he didn't have a chance to show it to the Kohen, and boom, it spreads to the entire body. Now he's impure. He needs to be quarantined. Had he rushed to the Kohen, who would have put him in quarantine before it had a chance to spread, and it would have spread during a state of quarantine, he would be pure, as we explained. This would be a case of coming early wins. The early bird special wins. Sometimes doesn't pay off, but other times it does.